There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the soul has had enough of shrinking to fit into places too small for its vastness, enough of nodding in agreement while the heart protests in silence, enough of postponing its own becoming just to avoid discomfort, rejection, or judgment. This moment doesn't come with fireworks. It comes like a whisper, choose yourself, and when you do, the entire axis of your life shifts. Not outwardly at first, not in your bank account or your job title, but in your inner world, in the way your breath settles into your lungs, in how your spine aligns with truth, in how your eyes begin to see again. Choosing yourself is not an act of ego. It is an act of spiritual responsibility. Let us explore what truly happens when you finally, unapologetically, choose yourself above all else. There exists within each of us a voice ancient, timeless, untouched by the world's noise. It does not shout, it does not argue, it does not plead, it merely knows, and for most of our lives we deny it. We drown it beneath obligations, expectations, and the clamor of collective opinion. We push it aside in favor of approval. We mask it with performance, ambition, and smiles that don't reach our eyes. We call it impractical, irrational, too emotional, but it waits. It waits beneath the surface of our polished lives, like a river running underground, waiting to be remembered. To choose yourself is to begin listening to that voice again, not with the ears of your intellect, but with the soul that remembers what you've tried to forget. This voice does not speak in the language of resumes, bank statements, or social media profiles. It speaks in the hush of intuition, in the tightness of your chest when you betray your truth, in the spark behind your eyes when you're doing something that truly matters. Most people never learn to listen. They've been taught since childhood to conform, to please, to suppress. As children, when they cried out in anger or sadness, they were told, "Be quiet." When they expressed wonder or imagination, they were told, "Grow up." Slowly, the voice within began to dim, replaced by external scripts. You should do this. You must be that. This is what success looks like. But deep within, the voice never dies. It merely retreats. Then comes the moment, a moment that arrives like a whisper or sometimes like a storm, when the voice returns. You might be sitting in a meeting, surrounded by colleagues and coffee cups, when suddenly a part of you cries out, "This isn't who I am." Or you may be lying next to someone you thought you loved, and your body aches not from physical pain, but from spiritual silence. In these moments, the voice doesn't demand, it reminds. When you finally choose yourself, you no longer treat this voice as an inconvenience. You begin to revere it. Silence becomes sacred because in silence, this voice grows louder. Not in volume, but in clarity. You begin to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. There is no single path to this realization. For some, it arrives after years of subtle discontent, a lingering sadness they couldn't explain. For others, it arrives suddenly, a breakdown, a loss, a confrontation with mortality. But however it arrives, the invitation is the same. Will you honor the voice within or continue betraying it for the comfort of others? When you stop betraying your inner voice, life begins to change, not instantly, but fundamentally. You begin to say no where you used to say yes. You walk away from tables where love is conditional, where your soul must shrink to survive. You no longer laugh at jokes that humiliate others just to belong. You no longer sit through conversations that feel like emotional starvation. And perhaps most importantly, you stop negotiating your worth. But do not mistake this for ease. At first, this return to self feels like grief. You mourn the roles you played, the masks you wore, the applause you received for being who you were not. You grieve the lost time. You grieve the relationships that fall away. People may not understand. They may call you selfish, rebellious, difficult, but in truth you are doing the bravest thing a person can do. You are reclaiming your life from the false self. The psyche, if ignored long enough, will begin to revolt. It may manifest as anxiety, depression, chronic fatigue, or even illness. These are not signs that you are broken. They are signals that something within you is unlived. As Jung once noted in his own reflections, what we do not make conscious appears in our life as fate. To betray your inner voice is to live a fate that was never yours to begin with. Consider Maya, a name like any other, but a soul who found the courage to hear herself. She was a high-performing lawyer, respected and well paid, but dying quietly on the inside. Panic attacks became her weekly visitors. No pill or vacation could silence the screaming she felt beneath her polished exterior. One day, in a boardroom surrounded by suits and screens, her body refused to participate in the charade. She stood up, walked out, and never returned. That wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. Today, she leads a non-profit supporting women who have experienced abuse, many of whom never learned to choose themselves either. Maya didn't just save herself, she became a sanctuary for others. That is the power of honoring the voice within, and yet Maya's story is not rare, it's simply untold. There are thousands like her, living quiet lives of desperation, waiting for permission to listen. But permission never comes from outside. It must rise from within, like a phoenix from the ashes of your former self. Choosing yourself does not mean rejecting others. It means no longer rejecting yourself. It means no longer sacrificing your joy for their comfort, your truth for their illusion, your voice for their silence. And the beauty of this path is that the more you listen, the clearer it becomes. What once felt like whispers becomes a symphony. What once felt like fear transforms into freedom. Eventually you begin to trust yourself, not because you've never been wrong, but because you've learned that even your missteps hold wisdom. You learn to stand in your no with as much confidence as your yes. You begin to align your outer life with your inner knowing, and that is when integrity is born. Not the integrity others recognize, but the one your soul demands. To stop betraying your inner voice is not simply to make different choices. It is to become someone new, or rather, someone ancient within you that you are finally allowing to live. It is to walk through life not as a role, but as a soul. It is to remember that your existence is not a performance, but a pilgrimage. This path is not paved, it is carved. You will stumble, you will fall, you will lose people, but what you gain is unmeasurable, a life that belongs to you. And that is the life worth living. When you choose yourself, something sacred begins to shift. Your understanding of love undergoes a profound transformation. It is not that love disappears, nor does the desire for intimacy fade. What dissolves is the illusion you once mistook for love, the attachments born from fear, the sacrifices made out of insecurity, and the emotional bartering that asks you to abandon yourself in order to be accepted. To choose yourself is not to turn your back on love, but to purify it, to strip it down to its essence, so it can arise from truth, not trauma. Love, in its distorted form, has often been portrayed as selfless to the point of self-erasure. We have been taught that to love is to give, and to give endlessly, even if it empties us. We have heard tales of devotion that glorify suffering, endurance, and the silencing of our own needs. We are told that love endures all things, even when those things suffocate the soul. But this version of love is a shadow, a projection of unhealed parts, an echo of wounds passed down generationally. Real love does not ask you to disappear. Real love does not thrive in a space where only one voice is heard. where one soul carries the weight of another's insecurities. When you begin to choose yourself, you start to see the difference. You become aware of the moments you stayed in relationships, not because they nurtured you, but because they were familiar. You recall how often you confused intensity with intimacy, chaos with passion, and codependency with commitment. You begin to understand how many of your connections were built not on mutual respect, but on the silent contract that said, "I'll play small if you don't leave." This is not an easy realization. There is grief in acknowledging that some of the love you received was conditional. There is sorrow in seeing how often you bent, shifted, and contorted yourself just to be enough for people who never truly saw you. But in this morning, there is also liberation, because with awareness comes the power to redefine love, not as something to chase, prove, or earn, but as something you already carry within you. When love is redefined through the lens of self-honoring, everything changes. You no longer seek validation from relationships that cost you your voice. You no longer romanticize the struggle. You no longer confuse endurance with compatibility. You begin to ask questions that your former self might have avoided. Does this connection support my becoming? Can I show up here as my full self, unedited, unafraid? Does love in this space mean growth, or does it demand my stagnation? These questions are not acts of rebellion. They are acts of awakening. They are the inner soul demanding alignment, asking for truth, craving something deeper than the transactional connections society has normalized. In asking them, you step into what Jung would call the process of individuation, the journey toward wholeness. Love, when born from individuation, does not merge two incomplete beings in search of completion. It brings together two whole beings who choose to walk beside one another, not out of need, but out of shared vision. This kind of love honors boundaries, not as walls, but as sacred containers. It celebrates differences rather than fearing them. It does not punish you for your truth, nor does it use your vulnerability as leverage. It listens, adapts, holds space, and if it must end, it does so with dignity, not destruction. To love in this way, you must first risk solitude. You must risk the discomfort of being alone long enough to remember what you truly value. You must resist the urge to fill your loneliness with connection that costs you your authenticity. And in that solitude, something remarkable happens. You begin to love yourself in the very way you always hoped others would. You speak kindly to your own mind. You sit gently with your pain. You create rituals of care, not because someone expects it of you, but because you finally recognize your own worth. From this inner fullness, your relationships transform. You no longer attract people who feed on your silence, because you no longer serve it. You no longer find yourself in conversations where your presence is a performance, because you've stopped auditioning for love. Your energy changes, you walk differently, you speak with clarity, and people feel it. They may not understand it, but they feel it. Some will rise to meet you in this new space. Others will fall away. Let them. Psychologists call this self-differentiation, the capacity to maintain your sense of self in intimate relationships. A study by the University of California found that individuals who cultivate this inner autonomy experience greater relationship satisfaction, fewer power struggles, and a stronger sense of mutual respect. In essence, the more you choose yourself, the more fulfilling your connections become, not because others complete you, but because you no longer abandon yourself in their presence. We often fear that choosing ourselves will make us unlovable, that setting boundaries will repel others, that speaking our truth will leave us alone. But the opposite is true. When you choose yourself, you become magnetic, not because you are perfect, but because you are real. People are drawn to what is whole, what is grounded, what is alive with authenticity. Your relationships begin to reflect the love you've cultivated within, and those that cannot meet you there, they fade, not as punishment, but as a natural consequence of your evolution. Love is not meant to be a battlefield where you fight to be seen. It is not meant to be a prison of sacrifice where only one person's needs are met. It is not meant to be a currency traded for approval. When you choose yourself, you stop participating in these dynamics. You recognize that love, in its highest form, is not possession, performance, or power. It is presence, and presence cannot exist where you are not allowed to be who you are. The truth is, most of us were never taught how to love in this way. We were taught how to earn love, how to chase it, how to fear its absence. We inherited stories of suffering, models of martyrdom, but now we have the chance to rewrite the script. To model a love that begins within and extends outward with intention, not desperation. Choosing yourself is the beginning of a new love story, one in which you are both the author and the beloved. And from this foundation, every connection you build becomes a conscious choice, not a compulsion. You are no longer seeking to be chosen, because you have already chosen yourself, and that, in the truest sense, is what love was meant to be all along. There is a mysterious law at work in the human psyche, one that governs the hidden architecture of the soul's journey toward wholeness. It cannot be grasped by logic alone, nor can it be forced by willpower or strategy. It reveals itself quietly through lived experience, softened only in hindsight. But once you become aware of it, it transforms the way you move through the world. That law is simple. When you align with your authentic self, life begins to align with you. Not immediately, not always in the way you expect, but with a precision that cannot be denied. You stop chasing things that were never meant for you, and instead, you begin to attract what has been searching for you all along. To choose yourself is to declare to the world, and to your unconscious, that you are ready to live as you truly are, not as a performance, not as a projection of someone else's expectations, but as a living embodiment of your essence. And this shift is not subtle, it is vibrational, it is energetic, it reverberates through every layer of your being. You no longer radiate neediness, anxiety, or the hunger to be seen. You radiate presence, confidence, integrity, and that changes everything. The world is full of people frantically knocking on locked doors. They chase approval, success, relationships, validation, believing that if they just try harder, shout louder, or fit better, something will finally open to them. But this frantic pursuit is built on an unconscious premise, that they are not yet enough, that they must earn their place, prove their value, force their destiny, and so they chase shadows and find only exhaustion. But when you begin to choose yourself, you stop moving from lack. You stop trying to force open doors that were never meant to open. You realize that the real work is not in the chasing, but in the becoming. You shift your focus inward. You begin to excavate your truth, to peel back the layers of who you were told to be, and reconnect with the core of who you are. And as you do, something remarkable begins to happen. The outer world begins to reflect the inner one. It is not magic, though it may feel like it. It is alignment. You begin to attract work that excites your spirit, not because you gamed the system, but because you became someone who no longer tolerates drudgery. You begin to meet people who speak your language, not because you networked harder, but because you stopped pretending. You begin to stumble upon opportunities that seem to come from nowhere, not because you manipulated the outcome, but because you cleared space for what truly belongs. And still, the world hasn't changed. You have. This is not about passive dreaming. Choosing yourself doesn't mean sitting back and waiting for life to deliver miracles. It means taking full ownership of your energy, your boundaries, your choices. It means saying no to what misaligns, even if it comes wrapped in praise or paychecks. It means walking away from roles that require your silence. It means risking the discomfort of solitude so that you can stop performing and start living. The transformation begins the moment you make peace with who you really are, not the edited version, not the people-pleasing mask, but the version that might be too sensitive, too bold, too eccentric, too quiet. Whatever you were once told was too much or not enough. That version of you is the key to everything. Consider the story of Elias. For years he worked in anonymity, an immigrant barely scraping by in a city that did not see him. By day he waited tables. By night he painted, furtively, compulsively, without an audience. But something in him shifted. Perhaps it was weariness. Perhaps it was a whisper from his soul. Whatever it was, he decided to stop hiding. He uploaded his art. No marketing strategy, no professional portfolio. Just the raw expression of who he was. Within a month his first piece sold. Within a year he was invited to Berlin to exhibit internationally. When asked what changed, he didn't credit luck or timing. He said, "The world didn't change, I did," and then everything followed. This is the quiet revolution that happens when you stop betraying your essence. You become magnetized. You draw in what matches your frequency, because you are no longer broadcasting from a false self. You are rooted in truth, and truth, by its very nature, calls forth more truth. There is a reason that things begin to unfold when you stop striving and start trusting. The psyche is not designed to thrive in self-betrayal. When we operate from roles that do not match our soul, the unconscious resists. It creates tension, burnout, sabotage. But when we begin to act in alignment, that resistance lessens. The unconscious stops blocking the path. It begins to support it. This is why the old ways of hustling, manipulating, proving eventually collapse. They are unsustainable. They are out of sync with the deeper forces that govern transformation. And choosing yourself means surrendering those strategies. It means trusting that when you are fully yourself, life can meet you where you truly are. But make no mistake, this is not always comfortable. Alignment often requires loss. When you start to live in truth, you may lose people who preferred your mask. You may be asked to release jobs, identities, and dreams that were built on survival, not authenticity. It may feel, for a while, like life is falling apart, but what is actually happening is refinement. You are being emptied of what is not yours, so that what is can find you. And what finds you when you choose yourself is rarely what your ego once desired. It is deeper, more honest. It may not be glamorous, but it will be meaningful. You may not be adored by everyone, but you will be seen by the right ones. You may not know what the next 5 years look like, but you will feel something even more powerful, that you are finally walking your own path. You stop knocking on closed doors, not because you've given up, but because you've learned that the doors meant for you do not require banging. They open when you arrive in truth. They respond not to noise, but to resonance. And the person who walks through those doors is not desperate, not fragmented, not seeking to be chosen. They are already chosen by themselves. This is the true meaning of alignment, to live from the inside out. To become so attuned to your essence that life has no choice but to reflect it. And when that reflection appears, not as a fantasy, but as a lived experience, you will know it was never about chasing at all. It was about remembering who you were before the world told you to forget, and finally becoming it. To choose oneself is to enter a vast interior wilderness, beautiful, silent, often terrifying to the ego that has been fed on approval and external attachment. What awaits there is not applause, not validation, not the comfort of company, but something far older and more essential, the self in its purest, unadorned form. And yet the road to this encounter is paved not with companionship, but with solitude. That is why so many turn back before the journey begins. They fear what they will find, or not find, in the silence. But solitude, when understood not as isolation, but as sacred space, becomes the very ground upon which true power is built. It is common to equate solitude with emptiness, with absence, with some kind of social or emotional failure. We are conditioned from childhood to associate our worth with connection, with being chosen, with being surrounded. We are told that success looks like being needed, liked, seen in the right rooms with the right people. So when we step away, when we stop performing for others, when we stop twisting ourselves to fit molds that no longer fit, there is a sudden quiet. And in that quiet, the absence of the familiar can feel unbearable. Relationships thin out, conversations grow distant, invitations stop coming. It can feel like the world has turned its back on you, but the truth is, you are simply shedding what was never aligned. This shedding is not a punishment, it is a purification. When we no longer prioritize pleasing others at the expense of ourselves, it reveals who was there for us, and who was there for the version of us that complied. When we begin to set boundaries, not walls but expressions of self-respect, opportunities that once defined our sense of worth may slip away. People disappear, some drift, some leave in protest, some go silent. But what feels like loss is in fact a clearing, the soul making room for something more honest. Yet it is here, in this stark and often painful in-between, that most people panic. They rush to fill the space with anything, another distraction, another attachment, another performance. They cannot bear the emptiness, not because it is truly empty, but because they have never been taught to sit with themselves, to listen deeply, to be enough in their own company. So they run from the very experience that could heal them. But if you can stay, if you can resist the urge to numb or escape, you will find that solitude is not a void, but a sanctuary. In its quiet chambers, you begin to hear your own voice again, not the voice filtered through expectation or fear, but the original tone, the one that has been waiting patiently behind all the noise. You remember things, what used to bring you joy, what dreams you abandoned to be practical, what talents you buried to belong. You feel the pull of long, lost desires, the itch to create, the ache to express. The hunger to live not as a role, but as a soul. In psychological terms, this is the beginning of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole by integrating all the parts of yourself that you have rejected, repressed, or forgotten. The shadow, the child, the creator, the rebel, the sage, in solitude they return to you, and it is not always comfortable. Some carry pain, some carry rage, some hold grief that has never been named. But all carry wisdom, and only by facing them, without distraction, without performance, can you begin to live a life that is yours. Solitude becomes the crucible where fragments become form, where you stop asking, "Who do they want me to be?" and begin asking, "Who am I truly?" And from that question springs freedom. There is immense power in no longer needing the crowd, in no longer needing every conversation to affirm you, every relationship to fill you, every moment to be occupied. There is power in walking alone, not because you are unlovable, but because you are no longer willing to betray yourself for company. There is power in sitting at a table by yourself and knowing you belong there, not because someone else said so, but because you feel so. This power is not loud. It does not demand attention. It does not scream or posture. It simply is. It radiates through your presence. People feel it, even if they cannot name it. It is the calm that does not beg, the certainty that does not argue, the quiet joy of being whole on your own. And once you have tasted this, once you have truly inhabited your own solitude, you will never again trade it for half love, half truths, or half living. You will no longer beg for crumbs of attention or validation because you have feasted at the table of your own soul. You will no longer shrink to fit inside someone else's comfort zone because you have expanded too far inward to be compressed again. There is a paradox at the heart of solitude. The more fully you meet yourself there, the more deeply you are able to connect with others, not from need but from authenticity, not to be filled but to be witnessed, not to escape loneliness but to share the richness of your own inner world. From this place your relationships change. You no longer fear being alone, so you no longer cling. You no longer fear being seen, so you no longer hide. You no longer fear silence, so you can finally listen. To make peace with solitude is to reclaim the parts of yourself that you gave away too easily. It is to become intimate with your own soul. To walk in the world with the quiet confidence of one who knows they do not need to be chosen, because they have already chosen themselves. And that is a power no one can take from you. When a person finally makes the sacred, defiant choice to live in alignment with who they truly are, something astonishing and profoundly human begins to unfold. They do not only liberate themselves, they begin to liberate others without even trying. This is the paradox of choosing oneself, that what seems on the surface like a solitary journey inward becomes a lantern lit in the dark, a quiet revolution that radiates outward. The very act of honoring your inner voice, your truth, your boundaries, this act becomes an invitation. Not through preaching nor persuasion, but by presence alone. Human beings recognize truth not with the mind alone, but with something far older, with the soul. When someone walks into a room embodying authenticity, there is a silent shift. We feel it. We do not need them to explain themselves. We do not need to understand their philosophy or their past. We simply sense that they are anchor, rooted not in roles or appearances, but in something deeper. And in that moment we are reminded of what we too once knew, that we were born to be whole, not pleasing, that we were born to feel alive, not merely approved of, that we were not placed in this world to disappear beneath its expectations. When you choose yourself, you stop performing for love, and in doing so you model what real love looks like. Love that is not bought with self-betrayal, love that does not depend on agreement or submission, love that holds space for difference and depth. Your very being begins to reflect something rare in the modern world, integrity, and integrity, though it may seem quiet, echoes louder than noise. You become a mirror, not in the shallow sense of imitation, but in the archetypal sense. Your wholeness calls out to the fragmented parts in others. Your boundaries, firm yet loving, highlight the places where others have let themselves be violated. Your courage reminds them of their own. Your presence awakens dormant potential. This is not because you are trying to lead or to heal or to teach. It is because you have become yourself, and in a world addicted to masks, the presence of someone unmasked is both disarming and magnetic. This does not mean everyone will celebrate you. Sometimes your light will agitate the shadows in others. Sometimes your refusal to play old roles will be seen as arrogance or betrayal. Some will resent the freedom they see in you because it reminds them of the cage they've built for themselves. But over time, even those who walk away may come to see you differently, not through your effort, but through the contrast your life offers. They will notice how peace follows you, how clarity shapes your words, how your energy is no longer leaking into proving or pleasing, and some may return, not because you asked them to, but because something in you reminded them of what they forgot in themselves. This is why choosing yourself is not selfish. It is, in fact, the most selfless act you can offer the world. The world does not need more obedience. It does not need more people who smile on the outside and collapse on the inside. It does not need more conformity disguised as kindness. What the world longs for, what every soul unconsciously yearns for, is the permission to be real, to be awake, to be seen without pretense, to feel without judgment, to speak without performance. And this begins not with a speech, not with a movement, but with one person, one ordinary person, who decides they will no longer trade truth for comfort, one person who stops waiting to be chosen and instead chooses themselves, who stops saying yes to what drains them, who stops hiding behind politeness when their soul is screaming for freedom. This person becomes the seed of change, and when enough of these people exist, the culture shifts. The family dynamic shifts, the community shifts, not because of force, but because of resonance. It is easy to believe that transformation requires effort directed outward, that we must convince, convert, or compete. But the deepest transformations come not from noise, but from embodiment, from the quiet conviction of someone who has met themselves in the depths and returned carrying a truth they will not abandon again. And when you carry that kind of truth, others feel it, even if they cannot name it. They feel safer in your presence, not because you say the right things, but because your presence communicates, "I do not need you to be anything but yourself." This is where relationships begin to heal, where children feel safer to express who they are, where friends begin to speak more honestly, where partners drop their armor, because one person dared to show up without their disguise. Others begin to believe they can too. It is contagious, this authenticity, not flashy, not dramatic, but quietly revolutionary, and yet, to live this way requires great responsibility. To be a beacon is not to be perfect. It is to remain faithful to your inner world, even when the outer world offers applause for abandoning it. It is to keep listening inward when others are shouting outward. It is to choose rest over performance, clarity over chaos, presence over pretending. It is to refuse to shrink even when shrinking would earn you belonging. It is to be willing again and again to disappoint others in order to not abandon yourself. This path can be lonely, but it is never hollow, because what you gain, your soul, your voice, your peace, is worth more than any counterfeit version of love or success the world could offer. And what you give, without even trying, is hope. Hope that another way is possible, that we do not have to lose ourselves to be loved, that we do not have to perform to belong, that we do not have to fit in to feel seen. So if you have chosen yourself, if you have walked away from what once defined you, if you have sat alone at the table of your truth, if you have listened to the quiet voice within while the world roared otherwise, know this: you are not just healing yourself. You are healing the field around you. You are opening doors for others, not with your hands, but with your being. You are not just free, you are freeing. And one day someone will stand in their power because they once saw you stand in yours. And they will not remember your words. They will not quote your advice, but they will remember how it felt to be near someone who had chosen to live fully and unashamed. And in that memory, something ancient and true will awaken in them. The mirror will do its work, the spark will catch, and the world will shift, one awakened soul at a time. Choosing yourself above all else isn't a one-time event. It is a daily practice, a series of small but sacred decisions. It is a journey that may cost you comfort, approval, even relationships, but what you gain is far greater: peace, purpose, power, the unshakable feeling that you are finally, irrevocably, home. So if you are standing at the edge of that decision, let this be your sign. Not just to choose yourself, but to never again abandon the one person you were born to honor most, you.